Today, we continue our detailed breakdown of the battles in the Donbas. In the last episode, we covered what was likely one of the hardest, if not the hardest, 3-month stretch of the war for Ukrainians since 2022. Fall 2024 marked the fastest rate of Russian territorial occupation in a long time, with approximately 397 square kilometers captured in September, 503 in October, and 725 in November. As we discussed, most of those gains were achieved in the area of responsibility of notorious operational tactical group in Donetsk, by the Russian Grouping of Forces Center, numbering over 100,000 troops, outnumbering the adversary roughly 4-1. Ukrainians already lost a critical belt of small cities to the relentless Russian infiltration, carried out mostly by small infantry groups, motorcycles, and ATVs, which in turn opens the road to the key town of Pokrovsk. At this point, most analysts agree that the city will fall within the next couple of months, along with a satellite town, Mirnograd, which would mark the final chapter in the occupation of the southern part of the Donetsk region. Pokrovsk stands at the intersection of multiple supply highways and a regionally significant railway station, serving as one of the two major logistical hubs alongside Kramatorsk. Its nearby Pokrovsk coal complex is Ukraine's only source of coking coal for steelmaking, the country's second largest foreign currency earner after agriculture, with a potential closure threatening to slash steel output from 7.5 million tons to just 2 to 3 million. In short, losing Pokrovsk would simultaneously cripple frontline logistics and deal $1 billion blow to the national economy. As of December 1st, indeed, most of the evidence points exactly to this scenario. The command of the Ukrainian grouping here still has loose control of the situation. Many reserves are deployed to the Kursk region, and the key lines of fortifications are breached. The latter, unlike near Ocheretine, exist, but almost all of them are either unfinished, oriented against their own expected direction of attack, or were constructed before the proliferation of drones and the acute shortage of men, making them ineffective in the current setting. The situation to the south is even worse. Russians are already inside Kurakhove, engaging in brutal combat with the 46th Air Mobile Brigade and supporting units. Logistics here are partially paralyzed due to pincers closing around the city and the active use of drones, which are less restricted by weather than in previous months. Most importantly, Velika Novosilka, one of the few sizable towns of the southern Donetsk region, still under control, is also on the verge of collapse. Ukrainians try to fix the overall grim situation from this sector. One of the Syrskis assault battalions, this time the 48th, is deployed for sharp counterattacks here. By December 4th, stormtroopers clear Novy Komar from the Russians, temporarily halting the infiltration. But many more forces are needed to truly relieve the pressure on the southern flank. The town sits in a precarious geographic position, with minimal fortifications and difficult lowland terrain cut by rivers, vulnerability that has been identified earlier but never adequately addressed. To the northeast, the situation is no better. By December 12th, the Russians advance strictly along the river and appear on the southern doorstep of Pokrovsk, in the town of Shevchenkove. The 33rd and 425th Assault Battalions immediately engage in heavy combat, trying to break Russian momentum and prevent further infiltrations. Both units use Bradley's M113 and M1117 vehicles to conduct their own raids on Russian positions. Particularly, the 425th Battalion takes its nickname, Skala, from the call sign of its founder, now Major Yuri Harkavy, meaning cliff. He built the unit from scratch at the start of the invasion out of volunteers with little military experience, forging cohesion through relentless combat from Bakhmut to Zaporizhia, becoming one of the most effective formations for tactical counterattacks. Moreover, the presence of high-quality Western armor in the hands of the 425th Assault Battalion makes them even more lethal. Unlike their Ukrainian counterparts, however, Russians are capable of sending company after company towards a certain death, a practice that eventually pays off through sheer attrition in this sector. The loss of Shevchenkove would mean that the southern pincer around the city is complete and anchored on positions that Ukrainians will not be able to retake easily. All this happens not only because of significant resources Russians pour into the ongoing offensive since April, but also because of poor decision-making and proliferation of false frontline reports on the Ukrainian side. In addition, the local command chronically mistimes every more or less major retreat from encirclement, and all of this unfolds in the light of the fact that Ukrainians also concentrate potent, even if several times less numerous forces in the region, which destroy hundreds of vehicles and kill as well as wound over 100,000 Russians over the preceding months. But they are systematically left with no solid fortifications to hold on to, which increases losses from infiltration tactics and glide bombs. On the Russian side, we see a drastically different picture. Under command of the Colonel General Andrei Mordvichov, the Russian grouping of forces center intensifies the use of armor in attacks, avoiding long columns but instead trying to break through with a few or even single heavily up-armored vehicles. These often attempt to retreat immediately after infantry disembarks, even if it means driving right over the bodies of those they have just delivered. After that, small infantry groups try to expand the wedge towards the newly inserted troops, while maintaining constant pressure on the whole front line. But, taking into account that the bulk of armor here corresponds to the last reserves, armored assaults are often followed by attacks on various civilian vehicles, even the legendary Lov vans, decimated by hundreds of drones. All this results in staggering casualties. The proliferation of fiber optic FPV drones also starts creating symmetric issues for Ukrainians, even though their losses are many times smaller due to the overall shortage of men, as well as the active use of MRAPs. This class of vehicles is often destroyed during logistics and rotation missions, but saves the lives of the crews, unlike the literally unarmored civilian cars that Russians increasingly rely upon. All this does not slip past the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, Alexander Syrsky, who has focused much of his attention on the Kursk offensive, but now intervenes to prevent further catastrophes. On December 13th, the head of the operational tactical group in Donetsk, Alexander Lutsenko, is removed from his post. The grouping's chief of staff, Colonel Yevgeny Ledovoy, and the commander of the tactical group in Pokrovsk, Colonel Pavlo Fedosenko, the commander of the 32nd Mechanized Brigade, and many other officers are dismissed in the largest command shake-up to date in this sector since the beginning of the war. The scale of those dismissals reflect the accumulated damage that poor leadership has inflicted. Most importantly, Lutsenko is replaced by Brigadier General Alexander Tarnavsky, the controversial figure, but not without experience, since he was responsible for the defense of Avdiivka and managed that critical engagement far more competently than the recent debacles. The new chief of staff is Major General Viktor Nikolyuk, whom viewers may remember from the skillful defense of Chernihiv back in 2022. Tactical group in Pokrovsk is now headed by Colonel Alexander Bakulin, another solid officer. However, those changes will not have an immediate effect. What also has a limited initial effect is the gradual redeployment of some newly created Ukrainian units to the Pokrovsk axis. In the Ocheretina breakthrough video, we already touched upon this topic, but here we can make a slightly deeper dive. The problem with formation since 2023 of the 141st through 144th, the 155th through 162nd brigades lies in the fact that the war's reality completely broke down the formation timeline as well as recruitment numbers for Ukraine. They also often lack professional corps, usually composed of officers who already served in other units when Alexander Syrsky was the commander of land forces of Ukraine and was responsible for formation. Once Syrsky became the commander-in-chief and focused deeply, sometimes even too much, on frontline operations and individual battles like Kursk, the formation of brigades was left to no one, despite Alexander Pavlyuk being on paper responsible for it. This means that brigades that are supposed to become a key reserve for 2025 campaigns are often left for too long in training centers without experienced officers to lead them, or they go to Western countries for training but still require additional preparation afterward, because no NATO army is capable of preparing them for the drone-dominated warfare that now defines the conflict. Already formed from objectively less motivated men than before, such delays and uncertainty result in high evol rates, with people voluntarily leaving half-formed units. Sometimes the troops and equipment from such formations are also urgently transferred to other units, requiring reinforcements, nullifying progress and building cohesion. The problems were often ignored as the command systematically resorted to cover-ups. Units such as the 151st and 155th Mechanized Brigades first showed overall weak initial performance, with the command unable to properly control even undermanned brigades, missing key elements, resulting in significant initial losses on unprepared positions. The prime example is the 155th Mechanized, which is deployed to the extremely intensive front line near Shevchenkove. The brigade's commander, Colonel Dmitro Ryumshin, was removed from his position within a few weeks due to cover-ups of the brigade's real state. Moreover, on November 29th, Zelensky dismisses Pavlyuk from his post as the commander of the Ukrainian ground forces. He is replaced by the extremely capable Major General Mikhailo Drapaty, who quickly starts rebuilding units such as 155th from the ground up, carefully supervising the complex process of restoring combat effectiveness right on the battlefield after heavy desertion raids. His personal effort returns esprit de corps and at least some order into chaotic new units, turning around the catastrophe with the formation of reserves. By December 18th, Russians significantly advanced to the south of Velika Novosilka, turning a few stubbornly held Ukrainian villages to the south into isolated pockets. To the north, they again take Novy Komar, restoring dangerous pincers. All this even makes Ukrainians to redeploy elements of the 155th Mechanized Brigade here from Pokrovsk axis around December 21st to secure the northern flank, while the 48th Assault Battalion tries to stabilize the southern one. Surprisingly, where battles still continue is Kurakhove, but the situation for defenders is also complicated. With Ukrainians holding the industrial part of the town, Russians make multiple attempts to approach from the south, but get only to the river and not across. They also try and fail to go around the water reservoir to cut off the garrison. Here, they actually still use long vehicle columns from time to time, out of which almost no armor reaches the actual front line, due to the active work of drones, remote mining, artillery, and even ATGMs. This sector stands as a stark contrast to much of the front line precisely because the 46th Air Mobile Brigade, one of the most tenacious Ukrainian formations in the southern Donbas, continues to mount stubborn resistance, having likely lost fewer positions than any other unit in the area throughout the preceding months. By January 1st, 2025, Ukrainians retreat from Kurakhove, exactly because of the threat that materializes with the capture of Shevchenkova near the reservoir. Near Pokrovsk, the salient to the south also grows, with another Shevchenkova, this time on Pokrovsk outskirts, fully captured. The river and the command of newly formed units, such as the 155th, 153rd Mechanized and 152nd Yager Brigades, also contribute to fragile overall defense. The only real reason why Russians do not infiltrate into Pokrovsk at this point is the veteran brigades such as 25th Airborne and 68th Yager, as well as brutal but effective assault battalions. Over December, those are expanded into regiments, but the nature of their use remains the same while scale grows. These are forces for quick deployments and heavy assaults of last resort, designed to break enemy momentum in multiple key sectors, so it's common for them to fight on 3 or 4 different front lines at the same time. From the very beginning of New Year, Russians start attempting to advance in another long deprioritized sector, held mostly by 111th Territorial Defense Brigade and the rugged 15th National Guard Brigade. From the area of Vozdvizhenka, they intend to create a northern pincer around the city to take control of key supply routes, still numerous. By January 8th, one of such routes is already in danger, with constant Russian advances towards Udachne, through which the railway and road to Pokrovsk run. But possible deterioration of the situation near Vozdvizhenka is seen as a greater danger, so elements of the 425th Assault Regiment are swiftly redeployed there by January 10th and immediately clash with Russians. Meanwhile, a significant number of Ukrainian units remain in very complicated logistical positions in pockets near Kurakhove and Velika Novosilka. By January 15th, the situation does not change much. Ukrainians continue to hold on to almost encircled positions, yet largely due to a new command managing to slowly withdraw forces to avoid a full envelopment or rout. Near Kurakhove, the only units that prevent full encirclement are the veteran 35th and 37th Marine Brigades, while the defense of Velika Novosilka largely hinges on the rugged 110th Mechanized Brigade that had to come back after the extremely bloody Avdiivka campaign into again all-round defensive action. The 59th Motorized Brigade, which tries to stop the southern pincer around Pokrovsk from expanding, is also driven to the critical point, together with the 32nd Mechanized Brigade. Despite offensive actions they often take with tanks, which are costly for Russians, in defense those units are stretched thin and easily outnumbered, holding out only due to the active use of drones. The 414th Unmanned Systems Brigade, the first unit of this kind in armed forces, and one of the most effective ones, assists in that effort. Also known as Birds of Magyar, this formation has become a force multiplier whenever it is deployed. We have seen the impact during the Ochretany battles, and now near Pokrovsk. Its drone operations play a pivotal role in maintaining something increasingly called the kill zone, a strip of terrain saturated by FPVs and heavy bomber drones, where any movement is potentially lethal. This kill zone, extending from several hundred meters to multiple kilometers in depth, represents the fundamentally new feature of the battlefield, observed and saturated by strike UAVs 24/7. This is one of the reasons why even under such pressure, Ukrainian command decides to reform the 59th into Assault Brigade and transfer it under the Unmanned Systems Forces, as an experiment to merge assault tactics with heavy drone use. All this is possible because the Russian advance actually slowly grinds to a stall. The best demonstration of reasons for that are the roads that Russians are using, filled with destroyed equipment and the equipment itself, which rapidly degrades in both quality and quantity. Winter 2024-2025 gives us enough videos of Russians using donkeys for logistics, While civilian cars and motorcycles are constantly used and lost in head-on assaults, another piece of evidence for the depletion of Russian forces is a much more active use of assault groups, made literally out of wounded soldiers, apparently sent just to distract and waste Ukrainian drones. Forced to advance by threat of torture and execution, the wounded are organized in hundreds of atomized groups, often walking on crutches towards Ukrainian positions near Pokrovsk. By January 20th, the Russians do not manage to capture Udachne due to tremendous efforts of the 32nd, 59th and 414th Brigades and auxiliary units. Yet, they cross one of the railroads and capture one of the key coal mines near Kotlane. Further advances to the north here are halted by the 155th Mechanized Brigade returning back from Velika Novosilka, which despite its complex history and many issues during formation is eventually brought to a battle-capable state right in the front line and turned into a solid cohesive unit, trained in France and armed with Leopard 2A force, AMX-10 RCs and Web APCs, is now a force to be reckoned with, a testament to Drapati's personal effort in restructuring problematic formations. The attempts to create dangerous pincers near Vozdvizhenka are mitigated mostly by utterly brutal but effective assaults of the 425th Regiment, which again prevents a Russian breakthrough. Near Kurakhove the situation also freezes, as the Ukrainians manage to slowly pull out most of their forces from the pocket after the town itself is lost. So, Tarnavsky, Nikoliuk and Bakulin, who inherited a near-catastrophic situation, managed to prevent the fast fall of Pokrovsk that was seen as inevitable just a few weeks earlier. The only place where negative predictions come true is the Velika Novosilka area. The 110th, newly formed 141st and 23rd Mechanized, the 110th Territorial Defense Brigade and elements of other units are withdrawn from the city under pressure on the flanks, but the retreat is hastily and more akin of the rout, with serious casualties. All of this is due to poor coordination by the local tactical group in command, who mismanaged to retreat from Vuhledar in a similar way. The last retreat route was basically reopened only by incredible effort of the 48th Assault Battalion. If that did not happen, whole units could end up totally destroyed. On January 26, 2025, President Volodymyr Zelensky appoints Mikhailo Drapati as the commander of the Operational Strategic Group in your forces Khortytsa, of which Operational Tactical Group in Donetsk is a part. Drapati is already known as a brilliant commander and skilled crisis manager in the Ukrainian army, so the appointment is logical, especially as he, in his role as commander of the Ukrainian ground forces, personally restructured many previously problematic brigades, such as the 155th, 156th, 157th and 158th Mechanized, thereby significantly improving their performance. All these at some point were fighting on the Pokrovsk axis, or to the south of it. The only problem is that this wave of positive changes in command arrives late, with towns like Velika Novosilka lost by the end of January. Despite faulty defense, it would be a stretch to say that only Ukrainians suffered heavy casualties there. Russians did too, for example losing the whole battalion commander from the 394th Motor Rifle Regiment, Donir Tsaydionov, on January 30th. At the same time, Ukrainians for the first time in months started accumulating reserves on the grouping for counterattacks, reserves that at some point have been literally empty. Russians meanwhile run low on their own troops for exploiting the gaps, since the armor and infantry they have been meticulously gathering for the final push to Pokrovsk at the end of 2024, including multiple elite marine brigades and VDV divisions, are mostly redeployed and subsequently destroyed in the Kursk region. The scale of this diversion is significant. More than half of all Russian VDV units, 2 full airborne divisions, 2 VDV brigades, 2 marine brigades and 1 marine regiment have been committed to Kursk, along with over 10 other brigades and between 12 and 15,000 North Korean troops. All this prompts Ukrainians to start planning counterattacks to relieve a besieged stronghold and postpone its fall as long as possible. By February 3rd, a significant portion of the 5th Assault Brigade is concentrated to reinforce the southern outskirts of Pokrovsk. This in turn allows the 425th Assault Regiment to concentrate forces that have been jumping from one part of the front line to another and attack in the area of Pishane, rapidly advancing towards it. Support is provided by the 32nd Separate Mechanized Brigade, the 3rd Operational Brigade of National Guard, the 3rd Special Purpose Regiment and Gur Shaman Battalion. These are modest but still potent reserves. The operation, which ends with complete liberation of Pishane, is planned personally by the 425th Regiment Commander, Major Harkavy, and by Commander-in-Chief Syrsky himself. Recently appointed Alexander Tarnavsky also plays a big role, synchronizing the efforts of the 55th Artillery Brigade and various drone detachments in the area to increase pressure on Russian logistics. In the scale of frontline, this is a minuscule victory, But it not only reverses the gain that cost Russians hundreds of men and weeks of assaults, but also forces them into new, disorganized assaults that lead to further heavy casualties under improved drone and artillery firepower. Mikhailo Drapati tries to give as much freedom of movement to local commanders as possible, so counterattacks also begin on other parts of the salient to the south of Pokrovsk. By February 9th, another tactical counterattack succeeds near Dachinske. Russians meanwhile focus their attention on Vozdvizhenka, attacking with mechanized columns like in the old days. They have minor gains but are unable to create any kind of breakthrough to distract Ukrainians from attacks. For that reason, they soon come back to a head-on attempts to push adversary out of Pischane. At the same time, Ukrainians attack near Kotlene and succeed by February 16th, largely because many assault missions are conducted here by the 3rd Special Operation Forces Regiment operatives, who first secure coal mine area. With all those counterattacks, the bigger picture for Ukrainians improves slightly. To the south, the biggest Ukrainian loss during the time we were covering counterattacks around Pokrovsk is the loss of Andriivka. Together with coinciding attack on Ulakli, the Russians create a significant pocket, but the Ukrainians once again managed to slip away. Though Russian forces never managed to complete full encirclements, it's not from the lack of trying, but because even while advancing they continue to suffer losses heavy enough to prevent the rapid exploitation needed to close the trap. Around Velika Novosilka, Sarhinaev is assigned to lead the same name grouping, which has previously been controlled in a rather atrocious way. But the city is lost and Russians continue their advance in exchange for heavy losses, overwhelming rare Ukrainian observation posts in empty fields. Rivers that cross the defensive lines and sparse fortifications, originally built to protect from attacks strictly from the south, only makes infiltration easier. In addition, after the fall of Velika Novosilka, Ukrainian drone crews are likely pushed further back, unable to use the city infrastructure for shelter, so Russian assaults with huge armored columns, ATVs and motorcycles are renewed around Novy Komar. Coming back to Pokrovsk, by February 19th, Lysivka is fully cleared from the Russians in another tactical counterattack, which has become the rule under new grouping command. By February 24th, in this way, Ukrainians take back Uspenivka. The counterattacks are brutal, and most of them succeed due to the 425th Assault Regiment's combat effectiveness, which comes at a cost. The unit prevents a wall by heavily controlling and curbing such cases, and it absorbs a disproportionately large share of incoming mobilized troops, using them mostly in direct assaults and high-risk firefighting operations across the front line. This makes it one of the most casualty-heavy formations in Ukrainian military, but also one of the most effective when it comes to regaining critical positions. For Russians, the ferocious assaults of the Syrsky Assault Guard often caused far more than any of their own advances. The domination of Ukrainian drones in the skies only compound these losses, but the Russian Grouping of Forces Center has long ago made the decision to disregard casualties altogether, so wave after wave of men in small infantry groups are sent into constant assaults on newly recaptured Ukrainian towns. Not without results, as Pischane is partially retaken, but still, the momentum that previously allowed them to build a large pincer to the south of Pokrovsk remains broken. Where Russian momentum is not broken is to the south, which even forces Ukrainians to return to battlefield after a brief replenishment, the 72nd Mechanized Brigade, to assist near the village of Zaporizhia. The 72nd, famous for its decisive role in the defense of Kiev and then Vuhledar, have been worn down over years of continuous frontline duty, but remains a veteran formation that can still be counted upon in crisis. The next day, a combination of the 25th Airborne Brigade, the 3rd Brigade of National Guard, the 425th Assault Regiment and SOF units retakes the whole of Kotlene. Even the redeployment of the Russian 35th Motor Rifle Brigades does not help, because Tarnavsky's so-called fire grouping constantly manages to inflict heavy losses on any forces pushed into the narrow salient. The direct control of this grouping, however, is in the hands of the Colonel Bondarenko, one of the key officers of the Lazars Group, one of the best drone units in the Ukrainian Defense Forces, formerly belonging to the National Guard. The whole successful Kotlene assault was planned by Tactical Grouping Commander Bakunin and Operational Tactical Grouping Commander Tarnavsky, once again highlighting the autonomy that they enjoy under Drapati's overall leadership. All this results in the following situation by March 5th. Kotlene is now defended by the 3rd Air Assault Battalion of the 25th Airborne Brigade, the 152nd Yagor Brigade and the 425th Assault Regiment. The Russians are also pushed out of Udachne by forces of the 3rd Operational Brigade of National Guard, the 155th Separate Mechanized Brigade, the 144th Training Center of the SOF, and the 425th Separate Assault Regiment. To leverage positions in Pischane, which Russians, despite hundreds of extremely bloody assaults, recapture only partially, Ukrainians now quickly shift their focus to Shevchenkove. The adversary does not expect such maneuver, as they consider the town to be rock-solid basis of their salient. However, by March 9th, half of it retaken in methodical heavy assaults, marking the largest counterattack near Pokrovsk to date. The town is fully recaptured by Ukrainians by March 16th, first and foremost by the efforts of the again concentrated 425th Assault Regiment. This is a very significant achievement in light of the stalled Russian offensive, because the sizable Shevchenkova area is the southern gates to Pokrovsk, without control over which it's almost impossible to infiltrate into the city from this direction. Another solid counterattack is conducted near Andriivka. After the front line here became more or less straight, the Ukrainians avoided all the pockets, the defense strengthened. Near Pokrovsk, by March 20th, the Russians counterattack and take back part of Shevchenkova. By March 24th, they further increase activity near Pishane, which has already changed hands multiple times, but is currently rather controlled by Russians. Ukrainians at the same time unexpectedly advance from the retaken Uspenivka into Solone. With this, the situation freezes for the rest of the march and beyond, as Ukrainians finished exploiting the Russian lack of reserves that appeared due to extremely bloody assaults with minimal gains, as well as the Kursk offensive that absorbed men and vehicles alike. Not immediately, but this allowed first a slowdown, and as of spring of 2025, an almost complete halt of the Russian advance around Pokrovsk. Infiltrations of lone infantry groups still occur, but they are usually thwarted by mobile reserves of such units as the 155th Mechanized Brigade, which quickly annihilates the invaders using tanks and so-called search and strike groups. What creates more problems for Ukrainians is constant attacks inside the city by new, cheap Molnia kamikaze drones, as well as fiber optic FPVs. But the number of logistical routes still allows rotation, evacuation and supply missions. On the broader front line, the new challenges rooted in the lack of men and the proliferation of drones since 2024 have also started the process of large shifts in the structure and tactics of the Ukrainian military. If Russians once again failing to reach their goals, such as the capture of Pokrovsk, simply shift deadlines and continue to recruit more men while trying to scale up drone production, especially for their best drone units such as Rubicon, Ukrainians work more on ways to use limited resources more rationally. The new doctrine called Line of Drones, launched in March 2025, first recognized the reality that Ukrainians have to compensate for limited manpower by saturating the battlefield with FPV and bomber drones to the maximum extent. What this creates is a deepening of the kill zone concept already proven near Pokrovsk, an area where Ukrainian positions and Russian assault groups collide and intermix, while drones prey on targets from above. From this point on, the kill zone constantly grows in width, starting from just being an equivalent of gray zone, a couple of kilometers between two sides, but this traditional setup gradually starts to disappear in favor of constantly shifting strip around 500 meters to 10 kilometers deep that is equally visible to drones from both sides and covered by artillery and FPVs. The goal of the line of drones units, now concentrated under the Unmanned Systems Command, including the 414th UAV Brigade Burst of Magyar, the Rarok Regiment, K2, Phoenix and Achilles, is to be present on key parts of the front line and extend the kill zone further into Russian positions to prevent the adversary from reaching Ukrainian infantry, shielding it. Supported by digital systems like Delta Situational Awareness Platform for fully digital control of the battlefield, which the Russians lack, as well as incentive-based, points reward system for verified strikes for crews. This is the beginning of a new chapter of drone warfare. Both sides from now on will be focused on concentrating drone crews not just to hit standalone fat targets, but rather to make the kill zone wider and more skewed into enemy-controlled territory, cutting off logistics and inflicting losses where forces are concentrated for defense or offense. Exactly this innovation which Russians will be swift to replicate to some extent, yet with an already present focus on cutting off logistics and rotations for Ukrainian positions instead of protecting their own troops, is going to define the next years of warfare, not only in Donbas, but on the whole front line. To conclude, we have to again, like in the previous part, check the overall Russian progress achieved in 4 months of active assaults. In December, Russians occupied roughly 394 square kilometers, in January 325, in February 192, and in March 133, with over 90% of those gains happening in the area we discussed in this video. The average distance Russian forces advanced in the Donetsk region was just 15 kilometers over those 4 months. The trend is unmistakable, a sharp, month-over-month deceleration caused by the convergence of several factors. The delayed but still effective redirection of reserves to the Kursk axis, no changes in the Russian tactics, that become more costly as winter makes concealment harder. The already normalized use of huge number of ATVs, motorcycles and civilian vehicles for assaults, as well as the purge in the Ukrainian command that now more rationally allocates scarce resources. The latter likely has the largest impact, as in November alone, under the old command, Ukrainians lost more land than in January, February and March combined. The second important factor was the weather, with a mild winter still allowing drones to fly while making targets easier to spot. The construction of new defensive lines, with emphasis on continuity and the use of barbed wire as a primary way to slow down infantry, giving drone crews time to annihilate it, is another sign of transformation. An underappreciated factor in the stabilization around Pokrovsk is also the sharp decline in Russian glide bomb effectiveness, exactly during this period. By early 2025, Russia was dropping over 3,500 such munitions per month and over 100 per day across the front, with the Pokrovsk sector absorbing up to 450 per week at peak intensity. Yet, in late February, Ukrainian electronic warfare essentially rendered their satellite-guided correction systems useless. The bomb's GLONASS-dependent guidance, jammed by both Ukrainian and even friendly Russian electronic warfare stations, saturating the front line, causes accuracy to plummet to the point at which these bombs become as imprecise as their unguided counterparts. So, as of the beginning of 2025, Ukrainians have genuinely stabilized a front line that was on brink of disintegration at the end of 2024, and even counterattacked across multiple positions around Pokrovsk. Arguably, however, the counterattacks that aim to fully mitigate the salient to the south of the city do not reach that goal. Russians, after losing over 100,000 men during the time span, while inflicting 4 to 5 times fewer casualties on the adversary, significantly expanded their southern pincer around Pokrovsk, with clear intent to further try to cut the city off from supply lines. However, despite reportedly conducting over 44% of all assault actions here, they completely failed to infiltrate and take foothold inside the dense infrastructure of the town itself, as well as to form a second, northern pincer from Vozdvizhenka. Their successes are much more significant to the south, with the capture of Kurakhov and Velika Novosilka. But even there, the price paid turned out to be too high to sustain the pace continuously. Now, the battle for Donbas enters a very brief static phase, where Russians start to move some of their reserves to Donetsk region from Kursk after pushing Ukrainians out of it. Ukrainians also use the pause to build up new fortifications largely behind Pokrovsk, as well as implement two key reforms at the same time: the line of drones program to fully control and expand the kill zone, with specialized units under the Unmanned Systems Command, and the core system that will replace temporary structures such as Tactical Group in Pokrovsk and Operational Tactical Group in Donetsk, with their arbitrary composition, in favor of stable cores responsible for specific units and frontline sectors. All those changes are hard to implement while fighting a war of such a scale, but they are the only path forward for Ukraine, which every time needs to squeeze water out of the rock to gain an edge over an enemy that still holds a fundamental advantage in manpower. What the 4 months from December to March prove, however, is that manpower alone does not decide the outcomes. Command, technology and adaptability do, and on all 3 counts, the defenders of Pokrovsk turned the tide at the beginning of 2025.